The ship dropped out of hyperspace, and Danny Cole saw the station for the first time. It was massive. Prime hung in the darkness of space like a metal flower, its petals stretching outward for hundreds of miles. Lights blinked across its surface, and thousands of ships moved around it like bees around a hive. Danny stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back. He was 53 years old, a career diplomat who had spent his life preparing for moments that mattered, but nothing had prepared him for this. Humanity was about to meet the Galactic Council. They were about to ask for a seat at the table that governed 1,000 worlds. Lisa Grant stood beside him. She was younger, maybe 35, with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She had been a museum curator in Chicago before the government called her. Now she carried the weight of human culture in a small metal case tucked under her arm. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Danny nodded. "It is. Let's hope they think the same about what we brought." The docking process took 2 hours. Security scans, biological checks, atmosphere adjustments. When the airlock finally opened, a creature made of living crystal stood waiting for them. It was 7 feet tall, and light moved through its body like water through glass. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "I am High Curator of the people. You are the humans." Danny stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Danny Cole. This is Lisa Grant, our cultural representative. We are honored to be here." Made a sound that might have been laughter. "Honor is earned, Ambassador. Your species has existed for a cosmic heartbeat. You have traveled the stars for less than a century. The Council will decide if you deserve honor." They were led through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The station was filled with aliens of every shape and size. Some walked on legs, some floated, some moved in ways that made Danny's eyes hurt to watch. Every one of them stopped to stare at the humans as they passed. Lisa leaned close to Danny. "They're looking at us like we're children." "We are children," Danny replied. "To them, at least. Earth's entire history is nothing to species that were building empires when our ancestors were still living in caves." The council chamber was a vast dome at the center of the station. 12 platforms floated in a circle, each one holding representatives from the elder species, though with their crystal bodies, the beings of pure light and mathematics, the giant insects with compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans couldn't imagine, and 9 others, each more ancient and powerful than the last. Danny and Lisa stood on a small platform in the center, looking up at the creatures who controlled the galaxy. A spoke first. Its voice was like music and static mixed together. "State your purpose, young ones." Danny cleared his throat. "We come seeking recognition. Humanity wishes to join the Galactic Council as a member species. We wish to trade, to learn, and to share what we have to offer." "And what do you offer?" asked its mandibles clicking with each word. "Your technology is primitive. Your ships are slow. Your weapons are toys. What value does your species bring to a galaxy that has existed without you for millions of years?" This was the moment they had prepared for. Danny looked at Lisa and nodded. Lisa stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "We bring our culture," she said. "We bring our art." She opened the case and activated the holographic display. The chamber filled with images. The Sistine Chapel ceiling appeared above them, Michelangelo's masterpiece rendered in perfect detail. God reaching out to Adam. Angels and prophets and the story of creation painted on curved stone 500 years ago. "This was painted by a single human," Lisa said. "He lay on his back on wooden scaffolding for 4 years to complete it." The images changed. Van starry night swirled before them, the sky alive with movement and emotion. The great wave crashed silently. Sculptures by and rotated slowly. Music began to play. Ninth Symphony filled the chamber, followed by jazz and blues and rock and roll. Lisa spoke with passion in her voice. "This is humanity. We are young, yes. We are small. But we feel deeply and we express those feelings through our art. Every painting, every song, every sculpture is a piece of our soul made visible. This is what we offer the galaxy. She finished, the music faded, the images disappeared. Silence filled the chamber, then made that sound again, the one that might have been laughter, but this time Danny knew it was definitely laughter, cruel, mocking laughter. "This is your great offering." The crystal being's voice dripped with contempt. Smears of colored chemicals on flat surfaces, vibrations in atmosphere arranged in primitive patterns. This is what you believe has value. The pulsed with light. We compose symphonies using gravitational waves that span star systems. We paint with the light of dying suns. Your music is noise, random, emotional noise without mathematical beauty. The leaned forward. The hive creates art through the coordination of billions of minds working as one. Your paintings are the scratchings of isolated creatures too limited to see beyond their own small perspectives. One by one, the elder species spoke. Each one dismissed humanity's greatest achievements as worthless. Cave paintings, children's toys, the emotional vomiting of a species too young to know what true art meant. Lisa felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She looked at the Sistine Chapel still glowing faintly in her display and thought of Michelangelo's broken body, his ruined eyes, his 4 years of suffering to create something beautiful. Danny put his hand on her shoulder. "We should go," he said quietly. They left the chamber to the sound of alien laughter. The walk back to their ship felt endless. Other species watched them pass, and now their stares held something worse than curiosity. They held pity. The ship undocked and began its long journey back to Earth. Danny sat in his quarters and stared at nothing. Lisa stood at the viewport, watching the stars slide past. Humanity's art had been judged, and it had been found worthless. But as Lisa watched those distant points of light, something began to form in her mind. A thought so big and so impossible that she almost laughed at herself for having it. "They said our art is too small," she thought. "They said it lacks scale." She pressed her hand against the cold glass of the viewport. What if we showed them something they couldn't ignore? What if we painted something so large that even gods would have to look? The idea took root, and it refused to let go. 6 months passed after the humiliation. The news had spread across Earth like wildfire. Humanity's first meeting with the galactic community had ended in mockery. The greatest works of human creativity, the pieces that had moved billions of people to tears and joy and wonder, meant nothing to the stars. Some people grew angry, some grew sad. Many simply shrugged and returned to their daily lives. What did it matter what aliens thought? Earth would continue spinning. Humans would continue creating. But Lisa Grant could not let it go. She stood before the United Earth Cultural Council in a conference room in Geneva. 20 of the most powerful cultural figures on the planet sat before her. Directors of museums, leaders of arts foundations, government ministers responsible for human heritage. They had gathered because Lisa had asked them to, and because they remembered what had happened on Prime. "I have an idea," Lisa said, "and I need you to hear it before you decide I'm crazy." An older man named George Palmer, director of the Global Arts Initiative, leaned back in his chair. "After what happened out there, we could use a crazy idea. What do you have?" Lisa took a deep breath. "They said our art was too small, too primitive, too limited to our tiny perspectives." She paused. "So I want to create something big, something so vast that no species in the galaxy could ever ignore it." She pressed a button, and a holographic display appeared above the table. It showed a region of space, filled with stars and distant galaxies. "I want to paint a galaxy," Lisa said. Silence, complete and total silence. Then Palmer laughed. "You want to what?" Lisa kept going. "Billions of microsatellites, each one equipped with light-emitting polymers that we can control remotely. We position them across this region of space, carefully arranged, precisely placed. When we activate them, they create an image visible across thousands of light years, an image that the Galactic Council will see every time they look at this sector of space. A woman named Diana, head of the European Arts Commission, shook her head slowly. Lisa, the scale of what you're describing is impossible. We're talking about covering a region of space larger than most countries, larger than continents, larger than our entire solar system. Yes, Lisa agreed. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And how long would something like this take? Asked another council member. Lisa looked at them. Her voice was steady when she answered. 200 years, maybe more. The room erupted. People talked over each other. Some called the idea madness. Others called it beautiful madness. A few sat quietly and stared at the holographic display, their minds trying to grasp the scope of what they were seeing. Palmer raised his hand and the room fell silent again. Lisa, he said gently, none of us will live to see this completed. Our children won't see it. Won't see it. You're asking us to start something that won't end for 7 generations. I know, Lisa said. That's exactly why it's so human. She stepped closer to the table, her eyes moving from face to face. The aliens laughed at us because we're short-lived, because we're emotional, because we create art from our individual perspectives, but they don't understand what that means. They don't understand that humans can love something bigger than themselves. We build cathedrals that take centuries to finish. We plant trees whose shade we'll never sit in. We write stories that won't be understood until we're gone. She pointed at the display. This project won't just create art. It will prove something about humanity. It will prove that we can dream beyond our own, that we can work together across generations for a single purpose, that our short lives don't limit our vision. The room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Palmer looked at the holographic stars floating above the table. His expression had changed. You really believe we can do this? He asked. I believe we have to try, Lisa replied. The vote happened 3 hours later. It was unanimous. Project Canvas was born. The first years were chaos. Scientists and artists from every nation on Earth came together to solve problems no one had ever faced before. How do you build satellites small enough to deploy by the billions, but bright enough to be seen across light years? How do you coordinate their positions with enough precision to form a coherent image? How do you create a control system that can manage 40 billion individual units? Sam Porter, a young engineer from NASA, led the satellite design team. He was a quiet man who preferred numbers to words, but his eyes lit up when he talked about the project. Every generation will improve the design, he told his team. We just need to give them a foundation to build on. Doctor and astrophysicist from MIT handled the positioning calculations. She worked 18-hour days for months, filling notebooks with equations and star charts. The math is beautiful, she told Lisa during a late-night meeting. The universe wants us to do this. I can feel it. Ben Hardy managed the logistics. He was a practical man, and his job was to figure out how humanity would actually build and launch 40 billion satellites over 2 centuries. We need factory ships, he said. Ships that can travel to mining sites, extract materials, build satellites on board, and deploy them as they go. Generations of crews will live their entire lives on those ships. Lisa listened to all of them. She attended every meeting, reviewed every design, solved every dispute. The project consumed her life, and she gave it gladly. But she knew she wouldn't see the end. None of them would. On her 65th birthday, Lisa stood on a hill outside Geneva and watched the first factory ship launch into the night sky. It was called the Persistence, and it carried the first 10,000 satellites. A tiny beginning for an enormous dream. Danny Cole stood beside her. He had retired from diplomacy years ago, but he had never stopped believing in what Lisa was trying to do. Think they'll remember us? He asked, watching the ship's light fade among the stars. Lisa smiled. It doesn't matter if they remember us. What matters is that they finish what we started." She looked up at the sky, at the countless stars that had witnessed humanity's humiliation. "We're coming," she thought. "It will take us 200 years, but we're coming. And when we're done, you will never laugh at human art again." The factory ship disappeared into the darkness, and across Earth, in laboratories and studios and workshops, thousands of people continued the work. The first brushstroke had been made. Lisa Grant died on a Tuesday morning, 42 years after the project began. She was 97 years old, and she had spent every day of her final decades fighting for the dream she had started. Her last words, spoken to her as the sun rose over Geneva, were simple. "Don't let them stop. Promise me you won't let them stop." Her, a woman named Santos, promised. And she kept that promise for the next 30 years until she passed the torch to her own student. This was how Project Canvas survived, not through governments or institutions, but through people, teachers and students, parents and children. One generation handing the dream to the next like a sacred flame that must never go out. 50 years after the first launch, the galaxy still paid no attention to humanity's strange behavior. The elder species noted the human ships traveling to random coordinates in deep space, but they assumed it was primitive exploration. Humans were so short-lived. Whatever they were doing, they would surely give up soon. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. No species in galactic history had ever attempted something like this. No species had ever needed to. The elder races lived for thousands of years. They could complete their grandest projects within a single lifetime. The idea of working toward a goal you would never see finished was alien to them in every sense of the word. But for humanity, it was simply what they did. Cole was born 107 years after Project Canvas began. He was the great-great-grandson of Danny Cole, the ambassador who had witnessed the original humiliation, had grown up with stories of that day, told by his grandfather, who had heard them from his father, who had heard them from Danny himself. Now was 40 years old and captain of the deployment vessel Horizon. His ship had been in space for 12 years, placing satellites in precise formations according to coordinates sent from Earth. He would likely die on this ship, as his parents had died on a similar vessel. His children would be born here, grow old here, and continue the work. Kate Murray was his pilot, a red-haired woman with steady hands and a sharper tongue. She had grown up on a mining ship and joined the project because, as she put it, "I wanted my life to mean something." Chris Vance handled systems and communications. He was the youngest of the crew, barely 25, and he asked questions constantly. How much longer? When would it be finished? What would the final image look like? Answered patiently every time. "Another 100 years at least. I won't see it. You won't see it. I might see it if they're lucky and if they keep working." Chris would fall silent after these conversations, staring out at the stars they were slowly filling with light. The work was lonely. Months passed between supply ships from Earth. The crew of the Horizon lived in their own small world, marking time by satellite deployments instead of seasons. They celebrated when they reached milestones. 1 million satellites, 5 million, 10 million. Each number brought them closer to a goal they would never witness. But they were not alone. Across the vast darkness of space, hundreds of other ships did the same work. Some had been out here for generations. Families had been born, grown old, and died on those ships, never setting foot on any planet. They married between vessels when ships passed close enough. They held funerals where bodies were given to the void. They raised children who had never seen a sunrise but who knew every detail of the project that gave their lives meaning. On Earth, the work continued as well. Artists designed new sections of the image. Scientists solved problems that had seemed impossible 50 years earlier. Engineers built better satellites, smaller and brighter than anything Lisa Grant had imagined. Dr. Amy Park was born 130 years after the project began. She was a systems theorist, a genius who thought in patterns that other people couldn't see. Her contribution would change everything. The problem was synchronization. 40 billion satellites meant 40 billion individual units that had to activate at exactly the same moment across a region of space that light took years to cross. The original plan used relay stations and predictive timing, but the margin for error was too large. A single mistake could ruin centuries of work. Amy solved it in 3 years. She designed a quantum-linked activation system that connected every satellite to every other satellite, regardless of distance. When the time came, they would light up as one, perfectly synchronized, perfectly coordinated, a single brushstroke made of 40 billion points of light. She was 64 when she published her solution. She died at 71, never doubting that someone would use her work to finish what Lisa Grant had started. 180 years after the first launch, humanity had changed. They were no longer a single-planet species. Colonies existed on Mars and the moons of Jupiter. Mining operations stretched across the asteroid belt. But no matter where they went, they remembered the project. Every school taught its history. Every child learned the names of Lisa Grant and Danny Cole and all the others who had given their lives to the dream. The Galactic Council still ignored humanity. To them, 200 years was nothing. Humans were still children. Their strange activity in deep space was probably some primitive religious practice, nothing worth investigating. They had no idea what was coming. On a ship called the Endurance, a young woman named Miller watched her grandmother take her final breaths. The old woman had worked on the project for 60 years. Her mother had worked on it before her, and her mother before that. "Almost done," the grandmother whispered. "Almost done, you'll see it, you'll see what we built." Held her hand and promised she would. The ships kept flying. The satellites kept deploying. And across a region of space larger than the entire empire, an image slowly took shape. It was invisible now, dark and silent, waiting for the moment when someone would finally throw the switch. That moment was coming. After nearly 200 years, the long work was almost finished. And the galaxy had no idea that it was about to witness the greatest work of art in history, 212 years. That was how long it had taken. 212 years of work, sacrifice, and faith. Thousands of ships. Millions of lives dedicated to a single purpose. And now, finally, the end was in sight. Miller stood on the bridge of the deployment vessel Endurance and watched as the final satellite drifted away from the launch bay. It was small, no bigger than a basketball, but it carried the weight of human history on its metal skin. Satellite number 40,782,400,001. The last piece of the puzzle. His crew gathered behind him. 12 people who had spent their entire lives on this ship, who had been born in space and would die in space, who had given everything to this moment. "That's it," said Navigation Officer Jen Adams, her voice barely a whisper. "It's done. We actually did it." Nodded slowly. He didn't trust himself to speak. His grandmother had told him about this moment when he was a boy. She had described how it would feel to place the final satellite, to know that the dream was complete. She had been wrong. No words could describe this feeling. He pressed the communication button on his console. "Endurance to Earth Control. Final satellite deployed. Project Canvas is complete." The response came 17 minutes later, delayed by the vast distance between the ship and home. It was a simple message, but it carried the emotion of an entire planet. "Earth Control to Endurance. Message received. Well done, well done, well done." Across human space, celebrations erupted. On Earth, people poured into the streets of every city, crying and hugging and staring up at the sky. On Mars, the colonial government declared a planetary holiday. On the factory ships and mining vessels and colony stations that stretched across the solar system, humans stopped their work and simply stood in silence, thinking about what their species had accomplished. But the work was not truly finished. The satellites were in place, but they were dark. The image existed in potential, waiting to be born, and it would not be born until the perfect moment. The Galactic Council's millennial gathering was 6 months away. Every 1,000 years, the 12 elder species assembled at Prime to celebrate their civilizations and display their greatest cultural achievements. It was the most important event in galactic society, watched by trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. And this year, for the first time, humanity would give them something to see. On Earth, a woman named Laura worked in a control room deep beneath the Swiss Alps. She was the project's final design coordinator, responsible for the last adjustments to the image that would soon blaze across the stars. Her great-great-grandmother had worked with Lisa Grant in the earliest days of the project. Art and engineering ran in her blood. The design had evolved over 2 centuries. The original concept had been simple, a representation of human creativity, something beautiful and unmistakable. But as generations passed, the image had grown more ambitious. Now it showed something far more powerful. Every species in the galaxy was represented. The crystalline forms of the light patterns of the precise geometry of all 12 elder species and hundreds of younger ones, all rendered in stunning detail across a canvas of pure light. And at the center, connecting them all, was a single human hand reaching upward toward the stars. Not a fist, not a weapon. An open hand offering friendship and peace and the simple message that humanity was here, humanity had arrived, and humanity would not be ignored. Laura made her final adjustments and uploaded the data to the satellite network. 40 billion units received their instructions. They knew exactly when to activate and exactly what color to become. They were ready. Commander Nick Torres led the activation team aboard the vessel Persistence, the same name as the first ship Lisa Grant had watched launch over 2 centuries ago. His crew was small: Communications Officer Bate Adams and Lead Technician Jake. Their job was simple but crucial. They would travel to the optimal viewing coordinates, confirm all systems were operational, and send the signal that would bring 200 years of work to life. The journey took 3 weeks. Nick spent most of it staring at the region of space where the satellites waited. To the naked eye, there was nothing there, just darkness and distant stars. But he knew that 40 billion tiny machines floated in that darkness, arranged in patterns more complex than anything in nature, waiting for their moment. "You ever wonder if it'll work?" Jake asked one night as they sat in the common room. Nick shook his head. "No, 7 generations of people gave their lives to this. It'll work." "And if it doesn't?" Nick smiled. "Then we'll spend another 200 years fixing it. That's what humans do. We don't give up." The Persistence reached its destination with 3 days to spare before the Council's gathering. Nick ran every system check twice. Bate confirmed communication links with Earth. Jake the quantum synchronization network that connected every satellite. Everything was ready. On Prime, the elder species gathered in the great chamber where Danny Cole had first presented human art. They had no idea what was coming. Why would they? Humanity was still a minor species, too young and primitive to matter. The humans had requested permission to observe this year's gathering, and the Council had granted it as a minor courtesy. Ambassador Maria Santos led the human delegation. She was tall and calm, with dark eyes that gave nothing away. She had been briefed on the project. She knew exactly what was about to happen, but she sat quietly in the observation gallery, watching the elder species parade their achievements, and she said nothing. Aboard the Persistence, Nick Torres looked at his crew. His hand hovered over the activation switch. 212 years, he said. 40 billion satellites, millions of lives, and it all comes down to this. Bate nodded. Jake smiled. Nick pressed the switch. For a moment, nothing happened. The darkness outside remained dark. The stars remained unchanged. Then slowly, impossibly, the universe began to glow. The council chamber was filled with the sounds of alien celebration. They had just unveiled their latest masterpiece, a crystalline structure that sang with light and resonated with frequencies that touched the soul. They had presented a mathematical proof so beautiful that even species who couldn't understand the numbers wept at its elegance. One by one, the elder species displayed their achievements, each one more impressive than the last. Ambassador Maria Santos sat in the observation gallery and watched in silence. The human delegation numbered only 12, a tiny group among the thousands of beings who had gathered for this millennial event. No one paid them any attention. Humanity was a footnote, a curiosity, the species whose art had been laughed at 2 centuries ago. That was about to change. The great dome of the chamber was transparent, designed to show the beauty of space during the celebrations. Stars glittered above like diamonds scattered across black velvet. It was breathtaking, a reminder of the vast universe that the elder species had spent millions of years exploring. Then the stars changed. It began at the edges of vision, a subtle shift in color that most beings didn't notice at first. But within seconds, the change spread across the entire sky visible through the dome. Points of light that had been white began to glow with color. Blue and red and gold and purple, arranged in patterns that were clearly not natural. The chamber fell silent. Every eye, every sensor, every form of perception turned upward. The colors continued to spread and brighten. They formed shapes, lines, curves, details that became clearer with each passing moment, and then finally the image resolved. It was a portrait of the galaxy itself. Every species was there, the rendered in shimmering crystal white, the captured in flowing lines of mathematical precision, their compound eyes glittering with 1,000 facets of light. All 12 elder species and hundreds of others, all represented with perfect accuracy and stunning beauty. But they were not separate. They were connected. Lines of color flowed between them, linking every species to every other species in a web of light that stretched across the visible sky. And at the center of it all, holding the web together, was a human hand. Not a closed fist showing strength, not a pointed finger showing accusation. An open hand, reaching upward, offering connection to every species in the galaxy. The silence in the chamber was complete. No one moved. No one spoke. Beings who had lived for thousands of years stared at the sky and tried to understand what they were seeing. Maria Santos stood. Her movement drew every eye in the chamber. She walked slowly to the central platform, where only the elder species were meant to stand, and she looked up at the image burning in the darkness above. 212 years ago, she said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber, humanity came to this council. We brought our art, our paintings, our music, our sculptures. We offered the best of human creativity to the galaxy. She paused. You laughed at us. You called our work primitive. You said it was too small, too emotional, too limited to matter. The High Curator, a descendant of who had delivered the original mockery, shifted uncomfortably on its platform. We could have accepted your judgment, Maria continued. We could have believed that our art was worthless. We could have given up, she smiled. But we're human. We don't give up. We dream. We work. We build cathedrals that take centuries to finish and plant trees whose shade we'll never sit in. We love things bigger than ourselves. She gestured at the sky. This is what you see when you mock humanity. This is what you create when you underestimate us. 40 billion satellites, 200 years of work, 7 generations of people who gave their lives to a dream they would never see completed. Her voice softened. We didn't do this to prove that we're better than you. We did it to show you that we belong here, that our art, our creativity, our short and emotional lives have value, that the universe is big enough for all of us. The image continued to glow above them, impossibly vast, impossibly beautiful. Light years of space transformed into a canvas that dwarfed everything the elder species had ever created. The High Curator moved. Slowly, with a grace that seemed almost painful, the crystalline being descended from its platform. It approached Maria Santos and stopped before her. For a long moment, it simply looked at her with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. Then, for the first time in recorded history, a bowed to another species. "We were wrong," the creature said. Its voice was soft, touched with something that might have been shame. "We looked at your art and saw only its size. We did not see its heart. We did not see its meaning. We did not see you." It straightened. The people formally apologized to humanity. "Your art is not primitive. It is different. And difference, as we should have known, is not weakness." One by one, the other elder species descended from their platforms. The pulsed with light that carried mathematical apologies. The clicked their mandibles in patterns of respect. Each species, in its own way, acknowledged what humanity had done. Maria Santos felt tears on her cheeks. She thought of Lisa Grant, who had started this impossible dream. She thought of Danny Cole, who had witnessed the original humiliation. She thought of all the generations who had lived and died on ships in the darkness, placing satellites they would never see light up. They were all here in this moment, every one of them. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed. Species that had warred for travel to see the artwork and stood together in silence, enemies made small by the beauty above them. The region of space where the satellites glowed became a place of pilgrimage, a reminder that even the smallest species could dream the biggest dreams. And on Earth, in a small museum in Chicago, a new exhibit opened. It contained the original case that Lisa Grant had carried to Prime, the holographic displays of the Sistine Chapel and Starry Night, and a single photograph: an old woman standing on a hill, watching the first ship launch toward the stars. The plaque beneath the photograph read, "Lisa Grant, 2020-72124. She looked at the stars and saw a canvas." Humanity had painted a galaxy, and the universe would never forget.